Azeem.
Hi everyone, I am Dr. Azeem Shah, representative of PPP Health4All. I welcome you all in this webinar. As you know, this webinar is about the case study of new Footscray PPP Hospital project in Melbourne, in Australia. This session is about 60 minutes. So we are lucky to have with us two speakers who are the key stakeholders of this project, including Ms. Tina, who is the Director, PPP Victorian Health Building Authority, and the Project Manager of the new Footscray Hospital. And secondly, we have Mr. Kaur, who is the Executive Director, Plenary Group, the bidder and the project company. So this webinar consists of presentations and roundtable discussions, including Q&A session. A recorded version of this webinar will also be available on the website of PPP Health4All. And from audience, your questions are welcome and will be answered after the presentation in the Q&A session. So this webinar is being organized by the PPP Health4All. The PPP Health4All is a knowledge platform that connects all stakeholders in the public-private partnership healthcare network. The objective of the platform is to assist the governments and private companies for developing sustainable and people-focused PPP healthcare infrastructure in line with the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. PPP Health4All operates as a not-for-profit organization and presently serving 61 countries. PPP Health4All supports public authorities in designing and implementing sustainable healthcare PPPs according to international best practices. It helps private sectors in preparation of bidding documentation and finding the best in-class experts. It also provides up-to-date market information and helps research institutions by organizing interviews with the industry stakeholders and the sector experts. So now a brief entry of the new Footscray Hospital project. However, our honorable speakers will enlighten us about the details of the projects. So in March 2021, the state government of Victoria entered into a public-private partnership contract with Plenary Group to deliver the new Footscray Hospital. The project was procured and will be delivered on PPP modality under the Partnerships Victoria framework. It's the largest ever investment in PPP health infrastructure project in the state of Victoria in Australia, which is worth of $1.5 billion for the construction of state-of-the-art 504 beds hospital in Melbourne, Australia. So it was a brief intro of the project. So for those you are just joining us, you are also welcome. So now I would request to our first speaker, Ms. Tina, who is the Director, PPP Victorian Health Building Authority and the Project Manager of the new Footscray Hospital, to share with us an overview, key facts, and the journey of the project so far. So over to Ms. Tina.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Azeem, and to PPP Health4All for the opportunity to speak about the new Footscray Hospital project. We love talking about this project because we're so proud of what we've been able to achieve. So thank you for the opportunity. And obviously, along with Carl, we'll walk through the presentation, I think, together and sort of speak to different points. So you get the different perspectives, both from a state perspective, but also from a private sector bidding for these projects here in Victoria. So Carl will help guide us through the presentation, and I'll sort of speak to it. And as I said, he'll come in with his points of view as we go through it. So look, just stepping back with a bit of a project overview. As mentioned, $1.5 billion was invested by the Victorian government, and it was delivered as part of the 2019-2020 state budget to deliver a new Footscray hospital. And it's really important to note that it is the Victorian government's largest ever health infrastructure investment, and really a flagship project for the building authority here in Victoria. The project, or the new hospital, is located approximately 9 kilometres from the Melbourne CBD, so still very much metropolitan sort of Melbourne. And it is replacing an existing Footscray hospital, which is 5 minutes up the road to where the new hospital is being built. Key reason for this significant investment at this time is the significant and sustained population growth that we've seen along that whole western corridor of Melbourne. And although the original hospital was delivered in the early 1950s, it has had limited refurbishment over that time. So it is an ageing asset. But more significantly, the sort of population growth we've seen along that corridor has resulted in a significant need in an investment in a new hospital. The new hospital will continue to be operated by Western Health, which is the health service that currently operates the existing hospital and forms part of an integrated network of hospitals that Western Health delivers along that corridor, covering approximately 1,500 square kilometres and with over 1 million residents. So that sort of gives you a bit of a context of where the hospital and the need for the hospital in this instance. I will move to the next slide. Just in terms of the project objectives, and I know often these project objectives seem quite high level, but we really spent a lot of time looking at them and talking about them, particularly with Western Health and all our other key stakeholders. And we did that really in the process. And I think it was really important because it helped focus the team throughout the rest of the journey. It helped focus us as we continued to develop the project, as we developed our project requirements, and it helped prioritise the state's priorities in terms of what it was trying to achieve with this $1.5 billion investment. So interestingly, they were the objectives that we kept coming back to at various key points of the project. And I think it's really important to do in order to sort of achieve successful outcomes on the other end. At a high level, those project objectives included improving access to quality care close to home for the people of Western Melbourne. We're really, something like 17,000 patients per year is what our figures are showing will be diverted back to Footscray instead of coming into the central CBD hospitals. And there's really a big focus here in Victoria in particular, and I think across Australia, in ensuring that people can get quality of care close to home instead of having to travel. Use evidence-based design to promote the physical and mental well-being of its diverse users, including patients, families, staff, and the broader community. Enable the delivery of integrated care, both within and beyond the hospital. Another significant objective for Western Health in particular, they have a big cohort of patients that suffer from chronic disease, and they very much adopt a model of home care outreach programs. And so we were very driven in developing a design solution and an operating solution that supported that model of care. Support operational efficiency and provide flexibility, obviously a key concern. Things change very quickly and we want to make sure that we have adaptable infrastructure that can be flexible and is future-proofed for future expansion and can respond to technology and other service demand changes. Creating an ecologically sustainable precinct, and we'll touch on this towards the back end of this presentation, ESD was a fundamental focus, and particularly for Western Health, and looking at it from a value for money and whole of life basis as well. And then finally, a recognition that although a hospital first and foremost, this was a significant investment by the state government, and we were looking to deliver a vibrant community asset more broadly that enhanced livability and fostered collaboration in education, training and research. And we'll touch on this later on, but Victoria University, which is one of our major tertiary universities here, has taken up approximately 5,000 square metres in the new hospital. And so that was, they have one of their key campuses directly across the road from where our site is situated. And so the integration and the collaboration from that perspective was a key objective for us as well.
And maybe just to take these from a bidding perspective, these objectives became a real sort of set of guiding principles for the approach that we took in responding to the state's brief. And there was a massive amount of work, as Tina alluded to define, I guess, what was important to the state and to Western Health as the operator. And we really took these and used this to, I guess, gauge where we focused our attention, but also to come together or attempt to come together with a coherent strategy and an approach that meant that the various aspects all sort of worked together in a way that really supported these objectives, but also responded comprehensively to the brief. And hopefully, as we work our way through, you'll see some of the features that we've incorporated that actually respond to these. And ultimately, where we got to, and one of the really shorthand ways of explaining this was that what we were creating was a hospital for the community, not a community hospital. And that was something that really made a lot of sense to the people on our team, but also significantly, I think, to Western Health and the state. So you can sort of see that here, and this is a little bit of a teaser shot of the front entrance. And to give you an example of, I guess, drawing on some of those principles and objectives that Tina mentioned, we spent a great deal of time, for example, just making sure that the vehicle traffic and the logistics around the site worked in a way that allowed families who are coming to the hospital to safely and easily drop off their family members, park their car, and then very easily get to the emergency department or inpatients or wherever they needed to go in a way that that was very easy, very low stress and very efficient. Similarly, when you look at its very prominent location, being able to navigate around the site and get in and get out from where you need to took a massive amount of sort of technical and traffic engineering to make sure it all works. But one of the features that we came up with that I reckon is fantastic is there's actually a road that runs under the hospital that allows connection from the front door to the emergency department, to the car park, to the loading bays. And it permits people to pick up equipment from the equipment store, to drop off family members, to access the lifts, to park their car and get around the site really easily. So hopefully that's updated, and I'll...
Yep, we're on to the next slide. So thank you, Carl. So just confirming, obviously this is being delivered as a public-private partnership. We have the Partnerships Victoria framework here in Victoria that has been used for a number of our projects, including the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre, Bendigo Hospital, Royal Children's, Royal Women's and the original Casey Hospital. And as Dr. Azeem noted right at the beginning, following approximately 18-month tender process, on the 10th of March, we entered into a contract to deliver the new hospital.
And I think we've got there a couple of the headline images that show renders of what the finished product will look like, and Tina did an amazing job making sure that that was absolutely very comprehensively documented, so that the value that was captured and identified within our bid is what is ultimately delivered. So we are very, very well assured that the finished product will look exactly like those images.
Absolutely, very critical part of what we were trying to achieve, holding Plenary Health to account. Absolutely. So we'll move on to the next slide, Carl, I think.
So I think when we look at these projects, really one of the very important aspects that we consider, both in working with the state and with Tina and her team and Western Health, is the composition of the private sector team. So this is a competitive process, and we need to ensure that, number one, the parties can work together, but they also have the capacity, the capability, and the financial, the balance sheet to be able to deliver the project and accept the risks. And I think just harking back to Tina's previous slide, from a plenary perspective, we've been a long-term partner with the state of Victoria and particularly the Department of Health there in delivering projects like VCCC and Casey. But in each case, we take a very different approach because of the specifics of the project. And in this case here, we pulled together a team that worked really well together and worked in a way that was really embracing of those project objectives and the very comprehensive process that is associated with bidding and closing these PPP projects. So many of you will be familiar with some of those names. Multiplex is a very established tier one builder in Australia, in Europe, and surrounds. Honeywell and Compass, again, are international organisations that in the case of this project here are undertaking different scopes of work that relate to the ongoing services, and I'll come back to those in a moment. Car parking, while the state retains the revenues from the car park, it's really important, and particularly in a hospital, that car parking spaces are safe, well maintained and efficiently operated, and we have a very experienced car park operator here from Australia and New Zealand that is looking after that for us. And I guess the other really key part, and this is just a really small subset of the design team, but through the bid and then through delivery, obviously the design is a really key part of the interaction with Western Health and the state, but then also providing the information that the builder needs to construct it. So we've got a great team there with Billard Lease and Cox doing the architecture work, Wood and Grieve and 4D doing the services and structure respectively. Like I say, small subset. I can keep going on with the full range of consultants and advisors, but this just gives you a bit of a snapshot of some of the main protagonists.
Great. Now, I am mindful, I can see a couple of questions coming up. Some of them we're going to answer as we go through. So I note that there's a query around the impact of the COVID situation, and I'll hold on to that question because we will answer it in a couple of slides' time. And I think there was another question around whether the project site is suitable for further expansion in parallel to increase in population, and it certainly does. There are various sort of shell areas that will get fitted out in the future, but there's also space where we can expand into, including in terms of additional mental health areas and so on. So yes, we have certainly allowed for that future proofing. Carl, I don't know whether you wanted to comment on that specifically.
Yeah, I think that was something that we recognised really early, and was one of the, I guess, the considerations exemplified by the state in the brief. And I think, based on our experience in dealing with hospitals, one thing's for sure is that they will need to expand, and that it's really hard to do it and maintain the operational efficiency after the fact. So by building in where it's possible and feasible and affordable, that additional expansion space, it really future-proofs, but also makes life so much easier for the operator down the track.
So in terms of the projects...
For taking the question during the presentation, it made my life easy.
Oh, no problem at all. No problem at all.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So in terms of project scope, look, we do follow the traditional path here of the core services model. I think that's an important point to make, in that the private sector consortium, so the Plenary Health Consortium in this instance, designs, constructs, and then delivers, finances, and then delivers the hard and soft facilities management services and life cycle over a 25-year operational phase. But the state retains the clinical services, so it will remain a public hospital, and Western Health will continue to deliver clinical health services consistent with the core services model here in Victoria. As I noted before, we do have area there within the hospital that is for the benefit of Victoria University, predominantly education spaces with a little bit of research, and also have been able to deliver, and this is a key sort of platform under our policy, where government has made a conscious decision to get the benefit of this, this type of investment at $1.5 billion to not only deliver the hospital itself, but try and achieve broader social outcomes, including value creation opportunities as part of that. The government here in Victoria has a framework in terms of value creation and capture, and we try and implement that in all our projects. And on this project, we have got additional commercial and value creation opportunities through childcare, pharmacy, food and beverage outlets, as well as some office space, allied health and consulting suites as well. So they all are part of the project scope that's being delivered.
Yeah, and I think, I was just going to say, I think the important point to note there, and you know, the framework that Tina alluded to isn't prescriptive. It really comes down to, you know, the initiatives and the ideas and the investments made by the bidders. And so, in the case of Footscray, we worked really hard to recognise, and I think come back to those project objectives, that this is a really important community asset. And while it's a hospital and has a core function, it's also a workplace. It's also where people go to study and go to visit. So we really wanted to create a precinct and a destination where, while still being a hospital, is somewhere where people can get a good coffee and get some food and spend time with their family that they're visiting, you know, not necessarily in their hospital room. So as you can see from the image here, this is showing some of the ground floor activation and retail outlets. And you can see that it just doesn't look like a hospital at all. And that was really part of the ethos and intentions behind our approach. And you can see it'll be a lovely space that people can enjoy year round, which is something we're really looking forward to seeing. I'll jump to the next slide. I think this sort of comes to, and as Tina mentioned, the approach that governments typically in Australia, but particularly in Victoria, take is that the health services are retained and provided by the public sector, by Western Health. In the case of Footscray here, there was quite a defined services scope, and as you can see, that hinges around a number of services, some of which are directly linked to and complement the delivery of patient care. What we recognised and noted in the case of the new Footscray Hospital is that when you think about the services delivery as being part of the patient experience, part of the patient care, you really need to think about it in a very integrated way. So how can you actually deliver a more efficient service that supports the clinical provision? And so the approach that we took was towards a very integrated model where staff have the ability and have the capacity to deal with multiple aspects of the service, but they're unified and have sort of a digital platform that allows the management of that service delivery, allows the tracking of the KPIs, but also lines up with sort of the monitoring, feedback and compliance regime that's embedded within the project documents that support the delivery here. So coming back to, I think, Tina's original point, the services specification is defining what the state is looking for in the services delivery. And that's an output-based, it's an outcomes-based specification. And we spend a lot of time understanding and analysing how we'll deliver that reliably, consistently, and in a measurable way across the term, so over the 25 years. And so, everything from making sure that the different types of meals, special diets and so forth, that the workflow process integrity meets the requirements of the hospital and the healthcare operator and the patients, all the way through to making sure that when life cycle maintenance is undertaken, that the facility can continue to operate safely and in compliance with all of the regulations, means that this is a really important part of the overall bid, but requires a great deal of work, technology and analysis to make sure that it can really be delivered with assurance. And working with Compass and Honeywell, unusually for a PPP, we went with two specialist service providers, one dealing with the sort of the hard FM and the other dealing with the soft services, the food, the portering and materials. That came up and we were able to deal with, through an active equity involvement, deal with that interface and make sure that we've got a really comprehensive services solution. I'll jump to the next slide here, and what this slide really does is probably just picks up some of the highlights and main points from our bid, and I think as Dr. Azeem and Tina mentioned at the outset, the size of the facility is significant with 599 points of care, and the capacity for future expansion. And we did take quite a layered and strategic approach to the way in which that expansion can be implemented without undue implications or disruption to the operation of the hospital. As Tina mentioned, the sustainability piece is a really important part, and we did do a lot to underpin that with some external certification as well. But I think one of the really positive parts and a real mature approach that the state of Victoria has adopted is recognising that with this significant investment, a lot of positive associations can be generated from the project. And it's not just employment, but it's also where some of that expenditure, that construction expenditure, is directed. So how much of it is local and how local is it? How does that project expenditure support social organisations and support the development of skills, like through apprentices and trainees and cadets? And so part of the competitive process and the bid evaluation is how well you do in what we call the government policy piece, and that is dealing with all of those really important, significant approaches that actually then support the broader economy, the broader community, but also leave I guess, the industry and the sector in a better place than before the project. And we'll talk about some of these in a little bit more detail, but given the approach that the state has, this is something that we do spend a great deal of time on, and is a real opportunity for procuring agencies to really focus the benefit that these projects bring within the local region. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Tina.
No, we do have a couple of slides towards the back end, which goes into a little bit more detail across that social procurement, those social procurement outcomes, which just goes back to my original point, where government has made a concerted effort, as Klaus says, to use these projects to advance these broader social outcomes. And so we embed them now into our briefed requirements and into our evaluation process, and they get weighted and comparatively quite significantly to ensure that bidders are incentivised to invest in those areas and to commit to them. And in fact, we have within our contractual framework obligations on the private sector party in terms of meeting what they commit to across job numbers and other social procurement outcomes over the delivery phase and the operations phase. The other comment I just want to make, obviously 599 points of care, that's actually quite significantly above what we went to market for. You know, we went with a minimum of 529 points of care with an upscope ladder, and we were able to achieve quite a significant increase in that capacity as part of this initial stage. It is intended that over time it was going to expand, but we were able to achieve some of that expansion up front, which was a real fantastic outcome for the project.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think overcomes the potential for disruption and the challenges in expanding down the track as well. So,
yeah. So moving on, I'm going to talk a bit about the program, and this is where I start picking up on the impact that COVID had on this project. It feels like a lifetime away now, but the process commenced with the release of the EOI in June 2019. The RFP was then issued to 3 shortlisted respondents in November 2019. So we did go with 3 shortlisted bidders. We will touch on in further detail, but the COVID-19 pandemic intensified here in Australia in March 2020. So that was approximately 5 months into the RFP phase and 6 weeks out of when those bids were due. So they were originally due in May, early May. In late March, Victoria went into lockdown. Not only did it go into lockdown, we got clear message from government that because of the impact of COVID-19, we had to temporarily suspend our process in order to divert or redivert resources both from the public sector and the private sector into the state's pandemic response. So we did temporarily suspend for what ended up being 2 months, and it was recommenced with bids coming in early July instead of early May. We were able to, though, keep proceeding, and it really is a credit that we were able to, and we'll talk about some of the implications, but a credit to both the state team and the Plenary Health Consortium and all their teams, that notwithstanding that temporary suspension and everything else that was going on with the pandemic, we were able to continue with our process. And preferred bidder was announced in October 2020, entered into an exclusive negotiation phase that then led to contract and financial close on the 10th of March and 11th of March, respectively. with the hospital scheduled to open in September 2025. So we had always intended that the hospital open in 2025. So notwithstanding the pandemic interference, we are still scheduled and on track to open the new hospital in 2025. So moving on, so the challenges, as I said, temporarily suspended. So once we suspended, the key issues really and challenges that presented themselves was the availability of the state and private sector resources, and to be honest, particularly the Western Health clinicians. As you can imagine, these were the very people that were on the front line of COVID-19 responding in the existing hospital to the pandemic, while at the same time, they were the very people we needed to be part of our interactive tender process initially and closing that out with each of the bidders, but also the evaluation process. So they were intimately involved throughout the procurement phase in developing our briefed requirements, sitting through the interactive tender process, and then as part of the evaluation process. So we had to work hard to ensure that we had that continuity in terms of those clinicians in particular, but all the project teams, obviously. Maintaining commitment from the private sector while minimising their costs. I mean, obviously suspending a procurement phase 6 weeks out of bid submission has various implications. And of course, once we suspended, because the state of the markets at the time, making a decision around how we were going to recommence the process. So thinking through, for example, were we to have a 2-stage bid submission process where the design and technical submission would be submitted first and the commercial financial elements would be submitted separately, because we weren't sure how the finance markets were going to fare, whether we would be able to get committed financing up front and how we would manage that process. In the end, we did go down the path of one single submission with a potential or with a refresh that was expected later, further down in the process once we had gone through the evaluation process if needed. We also had to work through what the pricing assumptions should be for the bidders bidding. Should they assume that COVID-19 was in play, that various restrictions would be operating in the market when pricing the project? In the end, we adopted an approach whereby we advised bidders that they were to price assuming there was no COVID, and in turn, we introduced a relief event, a specific COVID-19 relief event during the delivery phase and into the operations phase in the event that COVID was still in play once we got to financial close, and in so doing, we would then provide relief through the delivery phase. So they were the issues that we needed to work through as part of sort of assessing how we would recommence the process. I touched on the fact that we had to, within a couple of weeks really, move our whole evaluation process to be fully remote. We're talking in excess of 200 odd people and more who all form part of the evaluation process at some point. And so being able to achieve that all remotely while maintaining the project's probative framework was a real challenge, but we were able to get there and achieve that. The other key thing, as I've noted, was ensuring that the hospital design responded to the lessons learned from the pandemic. So, and it was one of those really difficult things to do because things were playing out in real time. So Western Health was learning as they were going what the lessons learned were in terms of how the design is optimised to respond to a pandemic such as COVID-19. everything from, the engineering requirements in terms of the rates of air changes in various rooms, through to designing sort of the hospital to be able to accommodate patients who have COVID coming in through the emergency area and so on. So all of those things were being done in real time. And once we did get to preferred and we entered into the exclusive negotiation phase, we did introduce additional requirements to ensure that we had embedded as part of our design those minimum requirements coming out of Western Health to ensure that the design could respond to a COVID situation more optimally.
Which thankfully wasn't too many additional ones,
yeah.
Tina. I think you did a reasonable job at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly right, Carl. And obviously, just on that point, I mean, that whole learning has continued to develop. And in fact, more recently, the Victorian Health Building Authority has updated its guidelines even further in terms of expectations from a design and technical requirements for dealing with COVID. Negotiating a pandemic risk allocation, which I've spoken about, and then achieving contract and financial close and ensuring value for money in what were volatile financial and insurance markets. So bond movement leading up to financial close, as is always the case. And of course, the state does take the risk on interest rate movements through to financial close. But interestingly, for the first time, well, there's always been insurance market issues, but they did really escalate on this one, sort of out of the blue. And, we quickly discovered that there were some insurance constraints in terms of sort of the business interruption insurance, and being able to secure that we traditionally allow for 48 months. But Carl, you may want to talk a bit further on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the process sort of dislocations that Tina mentioned were absolutely mirrored on the private sector side. And I can only say that we were very thankful that a lot of the initial sort of design ideas and the collaboration piece had been done while we were all working together in a bid office. And we then had to go into lockdown then and deal with everything sort of remotely, which was more sort of procedural and finalisation, but certainly did present some challenges. But I think of all in the final close, it's always the things that you don't necessarily expect that present the challenges, and certainly insurance was one that really required a pretty concerted effort and was a very difficult one to place to the full value and to meet all of the terms, given a couple of factors. One was the scale of the project, but also just the nature of the facility being a single location and so forth. So skittish insurers in international markets that were affected to different degrees by COVID certainly made that piece a very challenging aspect of the financial close process. I think the lesson that comes out of that is that it's not always the predictable or predicted aspects of a deal or a transaction or a bid that will be hard. More often than not, it's the wild card. It's the thing that usually goes without a hitch that presents a bit of a challenge.
Excellent. I think we can move on to the next.
Yeah, I'll just jump here, and this gives those on the call a bit of a picture of this is what we call the hospital street. This is the main entrance in the hospital, and as you can see, the design of it is the design team did an excellent job. But one of the characteristics we wanted to create within the environment there was that it'd be very welcoming, that it'd be very accessible, that it have views to the village green in the middle of the hospital, but be really active, be activated, have the retail cafes and other outlets that are very visible to create that very welcoming environment. And this is a really spectacular space and provides a really intuitive wayfinding connection through the hospital to be able to get, in order for people to get to where they need to get to in a really simple way. I'll maybe just quickly touch on the local jobs and employment. And as Tina mentioned, this is a really significant part of the project and one that we spend a great deal of time on. And, you know, obviously with these projects, they create jobs and new jobs associated with the construction work. But one of the real important aspects is how do you make that a sustainable change? Because we've all seen the occasions where a project gets done and people come in, do the work, and then they go again. They move to the next job. Whereas the objective here and the government policy that promotes it is how do we create that sustainable improvement in skills and long-term employment? And so our approach on this project was ultimately to really invest in and focus on training and apprenticeships and respond to the state's brief in respect of that, but to really pull that together with I think a really good initiative, which was something that Multiplex brought and something that they had successfully implemented before, and that was to create a really tailored and specific what we call the Jobs Hub. And I think the innovation here and the connectivity centre that's now been established was that this was developed and is now being operated in partnership with the government, with the Department of, and I'll get this wrong, is it Education, Skills and Training, Tina?
Yep.
On those lines. So co-located together, it helps provide the pathways for additional training, for education, as well as the direct opportunities in relation to the project, but also the social partners that we have partnerships with that support those job seekers to get the training that they need, to make sure that they've got the capacity to get to work and provide the connections to those various programs that get them to the place where they can, are often have a history of disadvantage or substance abuse or otherwise, can get them to a sustainable long-term employment and help break that cycle of disadvantage. And that's something that all of the parties within the team worked very hard to deliver and are very proud of, because we could see just the opportunity that this project provides to really transform the economy and society in the Western suburbs, an area that's been a long-term sort of area of disadvantage. Again, sort of touching on Tina's preceding comments, the local content, these government policy, the target for social procurement and sustainability are significant parts of the overall bid evaluation, and the state makes that really clear. And so, just sort of disregard that at your peril, really. But as bid lead, I challenged our team to do better and really look at how we can stretch ourselves in our local content. So how do we make sure that Australian manufacturers and suppliers are really involved and contributing to the project, not just during the construction phase, but over the operating phase as well. The team did a great job in lining up and working with a targeted group of social organisations to really partner with them and find products and services where they could be engaged and deliver, and really, again, contribute to the social and economic outcomes of the project, particularly amongst those disadvantaged groups, Indigenous parties, Indigenous groups, and disabled as well. And I think the other really significant part and one of the areas that Plenary as an organisation places great weight. In fact, I need to, as part of all our approvals, describe where we're going with our sustainability strategy, and that is, how do we make sure that what we're doing is fit for purpose and suitable over the long term, but operates as efficiently and makes use of those scarce resources as economically and efficiently as possible. And that's not just energy efficiency, and while that's an important part, it's also the interior environment for staff, for patients and visitors. Things like external views, fresh air, the views to nature, the biophilic design principles that help with a patient's wellbeing and recovery is really key. And touching on the final point, obviously, transport substitution. While there are sort of a significant number of car parks there, we've also made a real focus on connection to public transport and bikes and so forth to really give those that occupy the facility different options and different choices. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that, Tina.
No, I think that's pretty comprehensive. I do think from an ESD perspective, importantly, it's sort of incidental design as well. Like some of these initiatives aren't, you don't need to spend a lot of money, but it's really about, ensuring it's appropriately insulated and all of those sorts of some very basic things sometimes. But also, as Carl mentions, access to sunlight and all of those things that go towards those ESD outcomes.
Yeah, and if I could just maybe just amplify that point, because it's a really good one. One of you can, by introducing and designing in a way that reflects all of those sustainability and environmental principles from the outset, it's far more economical than trying to tack them on after the fact. And so that's where that role of the design team and the leadership in terms of developing the design and the bid strategy in total really shapes the solution and helps craft those early decisions in a way that delivers those outcomes in a really sort of economical way. It doesn't introduce an overhead or an additional cost.
Yeah. So just sort of concluding, just when we step back from a project outcome perspective, despite all those challenges, and they were, given the COVID-19 situation, the hospital, as I said before, remains on track to open in 2025. And we've been able to deliver a fantastic value for money outcome with significant upscope, as I was alluding to previously. So including obviously innovative and enduring design that will contribute to a positive legacy for the community. And we've shown you quite a number of images so far, and I hope you agree that with the comment I've just made, and we've got a fly through after this, I think, Carl, which will give you a better sense. Enhanced systems to ensure the hospital can respond during any future large-scale outbreak, such as COVID-19. Additional scope beyond the state's brief requirements, so approximately 6,226 square metres of additional area, 24 additional car parks and shelf space for future expansion of 86 points of care. Sustainability excellence, as we've just spoken about, and we do have a pathway towards future electrification of the hospital. It's not going to be so on day one, but there is a pathway that we could pursue. And that will assist, some of you may or may not know, but the Victorian government has got a net zero carbon economy commitment by 2015, so that will assist in that outcome. A catalyst for change for Melbourne's West, I think we've spoken extensively around that, and of course the extensive range of complementary services that, again, we've spoken about previously. So did you want to add anything, Carl, with the last image? Otherwise, I think that's probably the end of the formal presentation.
So I'll No, I think that's it's a great summary, and as yeah, hopefully you can hear me okay. I thought maybe I'd leave and maybe just wrap up on a couple of the headline images, and as Tina noted, you know, one of the objectives and one of the requirements was to come up with a design that was enduring and appropriate and so forth. And this is the view from, I guess, one of the prominent corners of the site. And look, my personal view is the architects have done a wonderful job in striking a balance of creating a facility that looks really timeless, but is you know, meets all of those requirements. It fits in really well with the site. It fits in really well with the surrounding area, but really transforms the inner west at the same time. And like I say, they've done an excellent job. And I'll leave you with this is perhaps my favourite render, and one of the features that we incorporated within the design. And this is a very Melbourne aspect of the facility is a rooftop cafe. And for those of you that are interested in horse racing, one of Melbourne's public holidays is the Melbourne Cup. It's a public holiday for a horse race, and the green space just down the hill is the location of where the Melbourne Cup is run every year. So not only is it an amazing outlook towards the city, it gives a really fantastic overview of Flemington Racecourse, the river, the parklands, and so forth, giving people in the hospital that fresh air, that outdoor space, but also just an amazing outlook as well. So with that, if you give me a moment, I'll stop sharing here and bring up the fly through, and we can perhaps run through, just quickly play that for those on the call, and hopefully this will do what it's supposed to do. Hopefully everyone can see that. And I will just take us to...
And this hospital...
Our opinions and our...
Sorry. Sorry, catch up. While that's buffering, sorry about that, it's probably worth noting the site is a bit over 4 hectares, I think, from memory, Tina?
A bit under, so 3.9 hectares.
3.9 hectares. So it's a big area, and this blue space here is the hospital street. Where I showed you that previous image. I might just try and reset this. I think it's just buffering again. Sorry, I had it all loaded, but for some reason it has. Let me give it another try. For some reason, it has frozen. I'll just try and bring it up using another method. If you give me a moment, maybe we can tackle a few questions while I do this.
Yeah, why don't I have Oh, Dr. Azeem, did you want to have a look at the questions?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Tina and Carl, for explaining the scope, PPP structure, and outcome of the project, and also revealing the key facts and figures of the project and enlightening us with the lesson learned and the challenges. And I also thank you very much for giving us a virtual tour of this project. So now we are at the last part of the session, which is just the question and answer sessions. So for the benefit of the audience, my question is to Ms. Tina. Could you kindly describe the steps that you have taken to prepare for the procurement process and the extent of specification of the requirement for the project? And also tell us what were the challenges and what worked well?
Yeah, thank you. Look, I think it's an important question because the upfront planning in particular of these projects is so critical. For the first time actually on the Footscray Hospital project, what usually tends to happen is there's the early planning, feasibility study and business case that's undertaken by a separate area of the department. And once the project is funded, it is given to the delivery team to deliver it. Whereas this time around, us in the delivery team actually got involved in that upfront planning phase. And so very early on, we were able to work particularly with Western Health to understand their model of care, first of all, how they were looking to operationalise their service in the new facility, and then worked with them and all their clinicians to develop what is the key document in our specifications from a clinical services perspective, and that is the functional brief. So we worked with them to move from an input-based perspective where they understood what their model of care was into an output-based functional brief. And that work was considerable because it did require them to really think through how they were going to operate, and importantly, how they were going to operate differently to their current environment. Because when you think about it, they're going to be moving into a significantly bigger and more modern facility. So the way they will operate will change. So we did a lot of work with Western Health, their clinicians, their support staff in developing the output-based functional brief upfront. And then it was those same people who then we kept in the process through the interactive tender process, and we'll talk a bit about that again, and then the evaluation process to ensure we had consistency throughout. We did a lot of engagement. Obviously, there was a lot of engagement with Victoria University to agree the area that they were going to have and how they were going to operate within the facility and how their requirements were going to sit with our requirements. And here in Victoria, as I said, we've got extensive experience in the delivery of PPPs. So we did a lot of work from a lessons learned from our operational hospitals, what worked well and what didn't. And we incorporated those lessons learned into our technical documentation and specifications, while concurrently adopting the standard form documentation. So the Department of Treasury and Finance here in Victoria have developed standard form documentation that we are required to adopt unless there are project-specific departures. So that were the sort of key steps in that upfront planning process.
Okay, thank you very much. My same question to Carl. As a bidder, how do you prepare for the procurement process?
Oh, yeah, very good question. Very good question, and it takes up a lot of time. And I think we work closely with government in the development of these projects, quite early on. And as Tina sort of alluded to, that early preparation involves sort of the early conversations with the industry and potential bidders as well. So with that information, we start establishing our teams, appointing consultants, and really making sure that when the project comes to life, we're ready to respond. I think the other piece, when we get into the process, there's some work that you can do early on that really shapes the direction that the bid goes. And one of the points that I'll just draw out as an example is a challenge with hospitals everywhere is logistics. So where do cars come in? Where do deliveries go? Where do all the different parties that need to interact with the facility, how do they get in and out? And so that was an example of some of the early work that we did on this project, so that when the brief comes out, when the RFP process commences, we've started to turn our minds and have some ideas as to how we might solve those problems that actually define some of the really significant decisions that you need to make in master planning and design development.
Okay, thank you. Victoria has a wealth of experience in the procurement and delivery of PPP health projects. So Tina, could you describe the considerations and the experience in the refinement of the risk allocation? And what suggestions would you make for jurisdictions who are early in their adoption of PPP project for healthcare?
Yeah. So, look, it's an interesting question. Obviously here, again, in Victoria, we've got precedent documents, and we have the Department of Treasury and Finance that's developed a standard form project deed, and implicit in that is a standard risk allocation. And we are required, each agency is required to adopt that, except where there are project-specific issues that require departures from it. So a lot of focus is, so we're not reinventing the wheel. The real focus is looking at what may be project-specific issues that we need to address. In particular, during that time, what we found was there was a particular contamination issue called PFAS here in Victoria that became a significant issue on one of our major roads type infrastructure project. Now, what that did result in is bidders on our project and more social infrastructure projects sort of getting spooked with some of these risks and looking to reallocate risks on what is really a different risk profile on our hospital single site, where you really do a lot of due diligence on the site itself, get a really good understanding. It's unlike the mega sort of projects across the transport projects, which are more linear and transcend across kilometres of road, where you're dealing with a variety of contamination and site condition issues. So I think for me, one of the key lessons was around, trying to ensure that where there are departures from the agreed risk allocation in the DTF documentation, that they can be justified on project-specific sort of grounds. We get the traditional areas that always sort of have departures in key areas, including changing law and so on, and changing control. So we sort of try and work through those on an individual project basis, but really trying to limit those, again, from a bid cost perspective, and ensuring we're not sort of reinventing the wheel, to those that are only project specific. And to the extent that they are real issues and they're from a value for money perspective, we are better off retaining some of that risk. We do that.
Thank you very much, Pat. Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
No,
please,
go
please.
on, Carl.
Thank you very much for a very detailed answer, because we are just running out of time. After this, I will have one more question. So the same question as a bidder. So Carl, how does the state's risk allocation has impacted or influenced your approach
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm sure from a private sector perspective, I mean, Tina gave a great summary of it, but it's a topic in itself, and we could probably each, from our own perspectives, probably speak for a day on that particular issue. But look, I think really our approach is to try to understand where the state is coming from and what they're trying to do in relation to the risk allocation. Now, obviously, the parties that are bearing the risk need to be able to do so with information, with understanding, and an ability to control it. And I think Tina's point about, or example of the PFAS, was a really relevant one, because what we did in order to address that and be able to ultimately accept that risk was to go back and do a whole lot more investigation and site analysis, so that we were actually able to quantify or identify exactly what that risk was. And as it turned out, the PFAS issue just didn't exist. So it was a bit of a trace, and yes, it was certainly a point that people were nervous about. But rather than just a knee-jerk reaction, in partnership with the state and working together, we were able to find the right answer there. Now, that's one example, and there were a whole host of others. And I think probably the area that ended up being the most complicated and taking some of the most time was some of the commercial, the complementary and value capture options that we worked on together, and implementing those within the standard sort of contractual framework that Tina mentioned probably took the most time and the greatest complexity in the project as well. But I think by working together and understanding what each party's concerns were, we were able to come to an agreeable and an agreed outcome.
Okay. Thank you very much. Because of the time constraints, so we can't ask too many questions. So now it's time for us to wrap up our discussion and conclude the session. Our panelists have tried their level best to cover all aspects of the projects within a limited time frame. Just in case the audience, if your questions were not answered, you can write us an email, and we will love to respond accordingly ASAP. So now I am briefly reiterating that what we have learned from today's case study. The new Footscray Hospital project is a long-term services contract between the public and private sector over the period of 25 years. However, PPP Victorian Health Building Authority has conducted extensive consultation with the stakeholders and community engagement activity during the development of the project. As mentioned earlier, this project was procured and will be delivered on PPP modality under the Partnership Victoria framework. Partnerships Victoria has focused on achieving value for money outcomes by allocating risk to the parties best placed to manage them, by innovation in providing health services, by inducing delivery of the project on given time frame and with an allocated budget. The Victorian government is making the largest health capital investment in the state's history to deliver the new hospital and to ensure that the demand for health services in the Inner West is met when the new hospital opens in 2025 and into the future. This modern facility will ensure the people of West Melbourne to have greater access to high quality, state-of-the-art healthcare services closer to their home. So respected attendees, I thank you all for your patience. It has been a pleasure being with all of you today. I would love to have your feedback on the webinar. All your suggestions and comments are welcome. I urge our attendees to join PPP Health4All Forum as member for having its data access marketplace information, and to be eligible for rendering its services. My sincere thanks, a big thanks to our panelists, Mr. Cole and Ms. Tina, for their time and for their very comprehensive, informative, and very educational presentation. So you guys have tried to reveal all the aspects of the project, particularly you have mentioned the scope and structure and the challenges you have faced during this whole journey. Thank you very much. At the end, I wish all a very good rest of the day and have a good one. So bye-bye from now. See you in another webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you.